Teresa Skupik, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, January 19th. U.S. President Donald Trump says he plans to steadily ramp up tariffs on European countries that are pushing back against his efforts to acquire Greenland, further escalating a dispute over the semi-autonomous Danish territory that he has long said that he wants. Speaking Saturday, Trump said imports from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland would face an initial 10% tariff. He added that rate would jump to 25% on June 1st if no deal is reached to purchase the territory. Trump's threat sets up a potentially dangerous test of U.S. partnerships in Europe. Several European countries have sent troops to Greenland in recent days, saying that they are there for Arctic security training. Trump's announcement came Saturday as thousands of Greenlanders were protesting outside of the U.S. consulate.
Just shows he has no remorse for any kind of human being now. He's just arrogant and a very big bully.
Well, I mean, a tariff of 25% is nothing against the free world, is it? I think that's the way you have to look at it. This is a fight for freedom. It's for NATO. It's for everything the Western Hemisphere has been fighting for since World War II.
European Union ambassadors have reached a broad agreement to step up efforts to convince U.S. President Donald Trump not to impose tariffs on European allies. At the same time, they are preparing retaliatory measures if those tariffs move ahead, according to EU diplomats. EU leaders are expected to take up the issue at an emergency summit in Brussels on Thursday. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said in a written statement she was heartened by the consistent messages from the rest of the continent, adding, quote, "Europe will not be blackmailed." And the Danish and Norwegian foreign ministers weighed in on the threat of U.S. tariffs over Greenland.
We opened that dialogue last week. We will not give up on that. I mean, I have an agreement with the American Vice President. It was reconfirmed after we have listened to the press spokesperson. So we will stay on track unless US decide differently.
Norges standpunkt ligger fast. Vi kommer ikke til å la oss presse, og den type trusler er uakseptable mellom nære allierte.
Og der noterer jeg mig jo også bare, at den amerikanske præsident er ukonventionel, for at udtrykke det diplomatisk, men Amerika er også andet og mere end den amerikanske præsident. Jeg har lige været der. Der er også checks and balances i det amerikanske samfund, og det giver mig sådan set en tro på, at når vi står sammen, og når vi er i stand til at forklare, hvad der står på spil, og det er jo ikke kun for Europa, der er ting på spil, der er også store ting på spil for USA, så skal vi også komme igennem det her.
Calls are growing louder for the EU to deploy its powerful anti-coercion instrument in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs in the standoff over Greenland. The so-called trade bazooka, officially known as the anti-coercion instrument, is a law that allows the European Union to respond to economic blackmail from non-EU countries. French President Emmanuel Macron has raised the prospect of hitting back with the EU's trade weapon that was established in 2023 but has never been activated. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke to the press about Trump's threats.
Denmark is a close ally of the United Kingdom and of the United States, a proud NATO member that has stood shoulder to shoulder with us, including at real human cost in recent decades. Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure. That is why I said the use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong. It is not the right way to resolve differences within an alliance. Nor is it helpful to frame efforts to strengthen Greenland's security as a justification for economic pressure. In relation to the EU, Look, firstly, we're coordinating very closely with the EU. I spoke to a number of EU leaders last night. I spoke to Ursula von der Leyen last night and intend to do so again either today or tomorrow, so that we're closely aligned. There's proper unity and coordination in our response. They will decide exactly what they will do next during the course of today and the coming days. But we're working very closely with them, very closely coordinated. And they were among the calls that I was engaged on for most of the day yesterday.
Do you think Donald Trump is genuinely considering military action?
Look, I don't, actually. I think that this can be resolved and should be resolved through calm discussion, but with the application of the principles and values that I've set out in terms of who decides the future of Greenland, and making clear that the use of tariffs in this way is completely wrong. On defence spending, we've obviously set out our plans for this Parliament, and we made commitments at the NATO summit in relation to going beyond that, and we stand by them.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says he is concerned about U.S. escalation on its push to buy Greenland after it threatened to impose tariffs on 8 European nations opposed to the U.S. Carney said that Canada's position remains unchanged. The future of Greenland should be determined by its people and Denmark.
It's a serious situation, and we're concerned. We're concerned about this escalation, to be absolutely clear. We always will support sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries wherever their geographic location is. I might add, to bring it to the current discussion today, as part of the discussions the Emir and I had about a series of situations which would have a common element, which is threats to or compromising territorial integrity and sovereignty, Ukraine being a very prominent example. But I'll bring it back now to Greenland. So we will always support that. The future of Greenland, decisions about the future of Greenland are for Greenland and Denmark to decide. And the security of Greenland, security is first and foremost for them, but very much falls within the responsibilities of NATO. I had conversations with the NATO Secretary General in Paris 10 days ago, within the past 2 weeks at least, about how we're going to further enhance that security umbrella. It's something that Canada is working on already and contributing to. When I say working on within the broader Arctic, the so-called western flank and northern flank of NATO. And that's the job of NATO, and that's the responsibility of NATO partners. I have spoken to our European NATO partners, a number of them, Nordic NATO partners. I've spoken to the Prime Minister of Greenland, and there's a full commitment, not surprisingly, as is appropriate, of NATO partners to the security of Greenland. That's the right way to address this security, and the right way, finish and then hand back, in terms of whether it's development of critical minerals, is to develop in partnership.
And U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is defending proposed tariffs aimed at 8 European countries that oppose President Donald Trump's push to acquire Greenland. Speaking on NBC News' Meet the Press, Bessent said the goal is to prevent what he described as a future national emergency.
If we look, for years, for over a century, American presidents have wanted to acquire Greenland, and what we can see is that Greenland is essential to the U.S. national security. We're building the Golden Dome, the missile system, and look, President Trump is being strategic. He's looking beyond this year. He's looking beyond next year to what could happen for a battle in the Arctic. We are not going to outsource our national security. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to other countries. In Trump 1.0, President Trump told the Europeans, do not build Nord Stream 2. Do not rely on Russian oil. And guess what, Kristen? Guess what is funding Russia's efforts against Ukraine? European purchases of Russian oil. So America has to be in control here. President Trump strongly believes that we cannot outsource our security. Because, Kristen, let me tell you what will happen, and it might not be next year, might not be in 5 years, but down the road, this fight for the Arctic is real. We would keep our NATO our NATO guarantees, and if there were an attack on Greenland from Russia, from some other area, we would get dragged in. So better now, peace through strength, make it part of the United States, and there will not be a conflict, because the United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world, we are the strongest country in the world. The Europeans project weakness, the U.S. projects strength.
Coming up, Prime Minister Mark Carney says Qatar has committed to significant strategic investments for Canada's major building projects. We'll be right back. Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived in Doha on Saturday to promote foreign investment and strengthen Canada's economic partnerships beyond its traditional allies. Carney's visit follows a trip to China and comes shortly after the unveiling of a new federal investment budget designed to position Canada as a stable, attractive destination for global capital. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Qatar has committed to significant strategic investments for Canada's major building projects.
To launch this new chapter in our relationship, I'm pleased to announce that Qatar has committed to make significant strategic investments in Canada's nation-building projects. This capital will help the projects get built faster and supercharge our energy industries while helping to create thousands of high-paying careers for Canadians. We're also announcing an ambitious new partnership while we deepen our ties across trade, investment, defense, and AI. After years of stalled negotiations, we're prioritizing a new investment promotion and protection agreement, which we'll finalize by this summer. This agreement will enable Canadian businesses to more easily expand their operations in and attract investment from this dynamic $290 billion economy. Following Ramadan, representatives from Qatar's Sovereign Wealth Fund will visit Canada to explore new investment opportunities. And in the coming months, a delegation of Canada's leading pension funds will visit here to do the same.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says the new electric vehicle deal with China represents an opportunity for Ontario and Canadian auto workers, even amid criticism from Premier Doug Ford and the country's auto workers union. Speaking in Doha, Carney noted there is interest from Chinese companies in producing affordable electric vehicles in Canada, though he did not name any specific companies that Canadian officials have been in contact with.
So let's look at the. Let me just recap the auto agreement and go to the question on prospective investment. The first is order of magnitude. 49,000 vehicles is the cap of this agreement. That's the same amount of vehicles that Canada was importing from China in 2023. Okay, so the same level. Although at that time there wasn't a cap. Now there's a cap, first point. Secondly, to put in context of the size of the market, that is less than 3% of the 1.8 million vehicle market for cars and trucks in Canada every year. Every year, that's how many cars and trucks that Canadians purchase. Thirdly, what's in the agreement is a commitment, or it's actually a cap within the cap, in terms of affordable vehicles that scales up quite quickly to 50%. So half of that total amount have to be vehicles priced at EVs at less than $35,000. So there's a big affordability focus there. And then the fourth element is an expectation that there will be Chinese investment, partnering with Canadian companies in Canada, and of course an expectation that meet our labor standards to work with that.
Prime Minister Mark Carney said Sunday that he has agreed in principle to join U.S. President Donald Trump's controversial Board of Peace, which is intended to support reconstruction efforts in Gaza. Speaking to reporters in Doha, Carney noted that Trump approached him about joining the board a few weeks ago.
There is a humanitarian tragedy in Gaza that is ongoing. And Canada will make every effort possible to address the situation and provide, at first step to alleviate stop the suffering, the intensification of the suffering, alleviate the situation, provide humanitarian aid, stabilize, ultimately move towards peace and a two-state solution. So we will explore every avenue in order to do that. With respect to the specifics of the Board of Peace, the President raised it with me a few weeks ago. I said, in principle, yes, obviously, consistent with what I just said. I will do what I can do. We will do as Canada what we can do to achieve those core humanitarian objectives. With respects to the specifics of the Board of Peace, we haven't gone through all the details of the structure, how it's going to work, what financing is for, et cetera. And so we will work through those in the coming days. I had an exchange of views with the Emir, His Highness the Emir, about that, and I found that we were very aligned about what needs to happen, how it needs to work in order for this to be consistent with a positive outcome.
Is $1 billion reasonable, though?
I mean, that's one of the modalities of that, money, how's it going? All these questions. Canada wants money to have maximum impact. Let me underscore one thing. Let me underscore one basic thing about the situation. We still do not have unimpeded aid flows, humanitarian aid flows at scale to the people of Gaza. That is a precondition for moving forward on this.
The Board of Peace is part of the Trump-brokered peace plan that saw a ceasefire take hold between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. The creation of the new organization has raised concerns that it could deal a blow to the United Nations system of international cooperation that Trump has long argued is ineffective and dysfunctional, and placed Trump in control of how the money is distributed. And in a move that has raised eyebrows across the Atlantic, the United Arab Emirates has cut funding for its citizens looking to study in the UK. Our contributor, David Clement, has more.
In a move that underscores growing international concerns over campus radicalization, the United Arab Emirates has quietly cut state funding for its citizens pursuing higher education in the United Kingdom. According to a recent report, this decision stems from fears that Emirati students could be exposed to Islamist extremism, particularly influences tied to the Muslim Brotherhood, on British campuses. The policy shift, which appears to have been informally in place even before last summer, excludes all UK universities from the UAE's list of approved institutions for government scholarships. This list typically includes elite schools from across Europe, the US, and beyond, but it notably omits British powerhouses like Oxford, Cambridge, and the University of Manchester. As a result, degrees from UK institutions are no longer recognized in the UAE job market, potentially diminishing their value for Emirati graduates. In 2024 alone, around 8,500 UAE students were enrolled in British programs, many supported by generous state aid covering tuition, living expenses, travel, and insurance in key academic fields. At the heart of this exclusion is the UAE's longstanding view of the Muslim Brotherhood as a dangerous source of extremism. Founded in Egypt nearly a century ago, the Sunni Islamist organization played a pivotal role in the Arab Spring uprisings of 2011, briefly rising to power in Egypt before its influence waned. The UAE has banned the group domestically and urged allies, including Britain and France, to do the same, citing its potential to spread radical ideologies across Europe and beyond. An anonymous source familiar with the matter told reporters that UAE officials simply, quote, don't want their kids to be radicalized on campus. Now, this development comes amid strained relations between the UAE and the UK, previously centered on business dealings like the attempted acquisition of the Daily Telegraph and financial woes at Manchester United. It also amplifies broader worries about Islamist activities at Western universities, a concern echoed by U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who posted on social media saying, quote, some of our best Muslim allies in the Gulf think Islamist indoctrination in certain parts of the West is too dangerous. In response, the UK government has defended its education system with the Prime Minister's office stating, all forms of extremism have absolutely no place in our society, and we will stamp them out wherever they are found. We offer one of the best education systems in the world and maintain stringent measures on student welfare and campus safety. Britain, however, has not designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terror group, though Prime Minister Keir Starmer says it's under review, a stance that has become a political flashpoint. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has vowed to ban the group if he gains power. Meanwhile, Canada, another popular destination for Emirati students, does not list the Brotherhood as a terror group, though it does acknowledge its links to terror groups like Hamas, which emerged from the Brotherhood's Palestinian branch in 1987. Importantly, this isn't a complete ban on Emirati students attending UK schools. Those with private funding can still go, and some UAE military personnel remain on scholarships. However, the move could limit opportunities for many and signal deeper geopolitical tensions. As global education hubs compete for international talent, this highlights how fears of radicalization are reshaping student mobility. Canada, for its part, continues to attract UAE students, though recent caps on foreign enrollments may change that dynamic.
Coming up after the break, Prime Minister Mark Carney is traveling today from Qatar to Switzerland for the annual World Economic Forum in Davos. We'll have this story and more news after the break. We'll be right back. Prime Minister Mark Carney is traveling today from Qatar to Switzerland for the annual World Economic Forum in Davos, where he will give a speech tomorrow outlining his vision for Canada in the world. Carney will use the forum as an opportunity to attract investment to Canada and meet with leaders from countries, international institutions, and major corporations. U.S. President Donald Trump is also expected to speak in Davos. And hundreds of protesters marched in Davos on Sunday to protest the launch of the World Economic Forum, demonstrating against global inequality, capitalism, and President Donald Trump's attendance, with signs like, quote, no profit from war.
I think it's important to show our kids that it's possible to give a voice against stuff you don't really like. So that's because we're here.
Kind of capitalistic right-wing class is taking the power over everybody else. So it's very dangerous. We have to stand up. We really have to stand together, because I think if there is enough people understanding what is happening, we have the power, and it's important just to be around. Yeah.
Inflation in Canada rose 2 ticks to 2.4% in December. Statistics Canada says the end of the federal government's tax holiday a year earlier pushed the annual pace of inflation up last month. It says Ottawa's move to take GST off some items for 2 months starting mid-December in 2024 had dropped prices for dining out, alcohol, children's toys, and more. But those discounts fell out of the annual comparison and pushed the Consumer Price Index higher to end the year. In an article posted in the Financial Post, our next guest warns that history may be echoing in unsettling ways. Drawing on the concept of Anschluss, the term used to describe Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria in 1938. The piece argues that territorial ambition and the misuse of national security rhetoric are once again shaping global politics. The article suggests that as traditional alliances weaken and economic pressure replaces military force, countries like Canada could find themselves increasingly vulnerable to coercion and influence from larger powers. It raises pointed questions about sovereignty, economic resilience, and whether Canada is prepared for a world where power politics are once again on the rise. Joining us now to discuss those concerns and what they could mean for Canada is the author of the article, Thomas Caldwell, chair of Caldwell Securities Limited. Thomas, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Teresa.
Now, you open your piece by reframing Anschluss as logical because of shared language and culture, then pivot to borders as artificial. How do you see this perspective relating to Canada's relationship with the U.S. border?
Well, my comment about artificial wasn't original. It was a quote from President Trump. He sees the border as artificial. He views North America as one entity, with his being in charge. And so that's his agenda. He's about real estate. And remember, all wars and near wars are always about real estate. Ideology can be used, God gets enlisted, but it's still territory. And that's how he thinks.
And how do you think Canadians react to Donald Trump making comments that these borders are artificial?
I think our reaction, we had a sort of a lame kind of like elbows up, like we're playing a game of hockey. This ain't hockey. This is a totally different game. And it may, hearken to Gordie Howe and being tough in the corners, but that's not what we're talking about here. This is a totally different matter. When you talk about America attempting or wanting to absorb Canada, it sounds extreme, but we live in a world now where we're discussing things that we would never have talked about a year ago or 2 years ago. And he's opened this Pandora's box. He's talked about the 51st state. And remember, the card he's using is national security, which is actually a Stalinist phrase invented by a fellow by the name of Felix Dzerzhinsky, who headed the secret police under Stalin. If you were a threat to national security, what is a threat to national security? But if you were, you could be hauled off, interrogated, tortured, and killed. That was it. Now, the new phrase is narco-terrorism. Oh my God, a narco-terrorist is nothing worse than that. So what he's talking about now is first up on this buffet is Greenland. And it's unconscionable what he's after. America used to have 30 bases in Greenland. Now they have one. And the Danes have said, listen, if you want 30 bases, you can have whatever you want there. But he's talking about annexation. He's not talking about national security. He's talking about resources. And he said, we got to stop the Chinese and the Russians from surrounding Greenland. That's absolute. So what he's after there is territory. When he's finished with Greenland, and my sense is he's going to keep driving at that, he's going to end up with two sides of the equation. He's going to control the Arctic from the Alaska side and the Greenland side. And then the next theory is going to be, well, we're kind of soft in the middle with Canada. Canada can't do this. We have to take over the Arctic for national security's reason. And remember, he wants to have this gold dome. And the gold dome that is missile defense has to include Canada, otherwise it doesn't work. So he will just say Canada can't do this, it's not participating. So this national security hoax, if you will, because we're not going to war with Russia, we're not going to war with China, everybody's going to push, but nobody wants a big war. It's not going to happen. But he's using that to penetrate into Canada. And I think he's not going to go to war. We're not going to have a war with the Americans, but he will try to make our lives economically miserable. And we have made ourselves vulnerable to that, by the way, with 10 years of idiotic, childish government out of Ottawa and the Liberal Party foisting that buffoon on the country. And now we're paying the price of that because we don't have a sense of pride. We've been robbed of our history. The only history they teach is how bad we were to the Indigenous, which is nonsense. So my point here is, it's the right time for him to be pushing, for Trump to be pushing in this direction, because we've also made ourselves vulnerable to this type of thing.
And I want to talk about the economic tools that you suggest in this piece. So tariffs, embargoes, trade pressure. Are they more likely to? They are more likely to be used than tanks to push Canada towards any kind of Anschluss with the United States. What specific scenario? What specific scenarios?
They're not going to use tanks. They're not going to use tanks. This is not going to be military.
Right.
That's not the.
But what specific scenarios or early warning signs should Canadians actually be watching for?
We've already got them. The tariffs on steel, the tariffs on Ottawa. This is designed to destroy on automobiles, steel, aluminum. We've already got the warning signs. He's trying to destroy key industries. And remember, Prime Minister Carney's been in China, and we have to find other buyers for our products, including our heavy oil. Because remember, Venezuela's heavy oil, that can feed those refineries on the Gulf. So the next thing is Canada's doing a lot of business with China. They're exporting oil there. And this is how we're going to we're falling into the trap, and we're going to be painted as the enemy dealing with China. But frankly, our natural enemy is now, and generally always has been, America. China's not our natural enemy. Yeah, ideology, these guys play hardball in China, make no mistake. But our getting closer to China as the rest of the world, they're trying to diversify our trade, will be seen as painted as a threat to American national security. Therefore, they have to take a more activist role. But it's not going to be militarily. They will try to make our lives as miserable economically as he can, so that being part of America becomes attractive.
And you argue that Canada is particularly vulnerable because of internal divisions, regional interests, and a loss of pride to its own history. In practical terms, what would Canadians need to do differently, politically, economically, or culturally, to make the country less annexation prone?
I don't know that there's a lot we can do now, but I think the starting point is remember we're Canadians. We have a proud and incredibly positive history, and we got to stop debasing it with this political rhetoric around Indigenous and all this other things. Oh, we've been terrible, terrible. No, we haven't. We built a country out of the wilderness. This was the safe haven for people all over the world, and including America. If you were a slave and you escaped in the United States, you were not free until you got to Canada. It has been the steam valve when other countries go whippy on us. So we've had a very proud, and we've stood up and fought against evil in the First and the Second World Wars. We were always stand up guys voluntarily. We didn't have conscription, volunteered. Now the word's conscription later in the war, but we got to rebuild our history. We got to get confidence in our industries. And I think Prime Minister Carney is doing the best he can to try to diversify our customer base. So he's doing what he can. So we'll just see how it evolves in the next little while. And maybe President Trump will overpay his hand in Greenland and cause him to pause for a minute. And we do have midterm elections, and that might cause him to pause as well. Who knows? We'll see.
Now, near the end, you invoke Franklin and Jefferson and portray Trump as resurrecting a centuries old version of United North America by any means necessary. If that is the long game, what choices do Canadian leaders need to make to avoid that?
To grow up and understand the fact that we're in competition, just as companies are, countries are. We got to make Canadians proud. We got to do things, cut away the stumbling blocks, red tape, and taxes that make this a less desirable country to be in. So we have to run a good government. We're in competition. And if we're doing a good job, people aren't even going to listen to annexation talk.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Teresa.
Coming up after the break, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. Bo Bichette is on the move. The longtime Blue Jays star has signed a 3-year, $126 million deal with the New York Mets, complete with opt-outs and no trade clause. We'll have this story and more of today's top national and international headlines after the break. Forum Daily News will be back shortly. As global tensions spill over into unexpected arenas, sports are increasingly becoming a stage for political statements and international disputes. On Sunday, that intersection of world affairs and athletics was on full display when a heckler shouted, quote, "Leave Greenland alone" during the U.S. national anthem at an NBA game in London. Bo Bichette has a new home. The longtime Toronto Blue Jay infielder has agreed to a 3-year deal with the New York Mets. The contract is worth $126 million over 3 years, with opt-outs after the first and second seasons. The deal also includes a $5 million opt-out bonus and a full no-trade clause. After playing almost exclusively at shortstop with Toronto, Bichette is expected to shift to third base with the Mets. I was joined by economist Dr. Moshe Lander for a closer look at what deals like this say about today's baseball economy, player leverage, and how teams decide when a contract is worth the risk. We've seen baseball contracts explode over the last few years, and Dr. Lander unpacked if these sizable contracts are even remotely profitable.
So I think that most teams don't make a profit on a year-to-year basis. That's the surprising thing when it comes to professional sports. These teams are lucky if they break even, and usually that's from maybe deep runs in the playoffs. If you can get to the World Series, if you can get to the Stanley Cup Final or the NBA Finals or the Super Bowl, that's where the money really comes in. But if you're not making the playoffs, you're very likely losing money. The thing that makes it lucrative for owners is franchise value appreciation. How many times do we hear something about somebody buys a team 30 years ago for $100 million and then they sell it today for $5 billion? That's where they make their money. And on the year-to-year basis where they're losing money, because it's usually part of their broader business empire, losses in one part can be offset against profits in another part to reduce their taxes that they have to pay to the government. Or they can even use it as a form of networking where you always see the owner up in the box with a bunch of people that are now announcing deals in other parts of their business empires. And so even if they suffer a loss here, it's to generate future profits elsewhere.
And Jays fans were obviously heartbroken that Bo Bichette didn't re-sign in Toronto, and there have been talks about the tax burden in Ontario when compared to elsewhere. We discussed how much the tax burden plays a role in major contracts across all Major League sports.
I don't know that it's as big of an influence on player decisions as we'd like to believe. Now, I mean, you have to talk to the athletes themselves, but very rarely have we ever seen athletes publicly or privately say, I'm not going there because of the tax. It's probably the other parts of the lifestyle that are going to bother them. So anybody playing up in Toronto, especially when it comes to Major League Baseball, means that any road game involves customs clearance. And any time that you come back to Toronto is customs clearance. When you're playing games in April and October in Toronto, you're having to deal with Canadian cold. I think that fine, the Sky Dome, and it's always the Sky Dome to me, can have the roof closed in April and October, but you still have to go outside. And don't forget that these athletes are not coming alone. In many cases, they have spouses, they have children, and they have to go to school in the damp and the wet and the cold. And, they're living here at least for 6 months a year, if not more. It's maybe a little bit easier in the NHL, and a lot more of those players are Canadian, so they at least understand that. But the NBA has a similar problem to Major League Baseball. There's one franchise on this side of the border. And so I think that, hey, if it's an issue of a couple $1 million here and there in taxes, that's maybe not as much of an issue as coming to a climate, a culture, or a situation that's not familiar to them. And they'd rather be somewhere that's closer to home where it doesn't involve as much of a runaround to try and actually be a part of that team.
And with the Dodgers making another major signing with Kyle Tucker, many in the sports world are speculating that the Dodgers payroll will ultimately end up creating a strike in 2027. Dr. Lander walked us through the dynamics there and how it's possible for the Dodgers to spend more on just 2 players than the entire payroll of another team.
Because baseball has a luxury tax, all that means is that once you spend beyond a certain threshold, you start contributing money to a kitty that's divided up among the other teams. I think the amount of money that the Dodgers are going to contribute to that kitty is about $190 million, which I think by itself would be the 19th highest payroll in Major League Baseball out of 30 teams, right? So it's a huge sum, but the Dodgers have a tremendous access to a TV deal that benefits them greatly. And of course, because they have one of the greatest players in the game right now, they have access to a market that is dying to have more and more access to being able to see him play in Shohei Ohtani. And so, I think part of it too is creative deal making. The Ohtani deal was a headline $700 million US, but the way that they structured it was that a lot of that money is deferred. And so when you take the present value of that money, it was only around $450 million. And I say only in quotation marks, but that's the type of thing then that allows them to go in and pay for greater talent as well. And I think smaller market teams are saying, well, we don't have the resources to do that. We don't have the ability, even through revenue sharing, to be able to pay the players this much, nor do we want to pay the players this much. And so I think when you start to see this disparity show up, at some point, the pushback is going to come from the small market owners who say, we don't have the wherewithal to try and compete with that. We're going to shut this down. I don't think it's going to come necessarily from the players, because the players are the ones who are getting those outrageously large numbers. And once one person sets the bar at a new level, then that becomes the negotiating point for everybody else down the line to say, well, if he's now getting this much, I'm at least half as good as him, so I should get at least half that much money. And that sets the bar going forward for everybody else. So I think it really is going to be a small number of owners that are just going to say, enough's enough. We can't compete in this. We have no prospects of the playoffs. We have no prospects of postseason. And like I said at the outset, the path to profitability in any given year is that you have to be able to make the playoffs. And so if you take a look at the NFL, where in any given year, 4 teams that were in the playoffs don't make the playoffs next year, and 4 teams that weren't in the playoffs get to make the playoffs. That's the type of thing then that at least everybody has a chance to share in the profits. And so everybody's comfortable with where it goes. Baseball doesn't have that. You could almost guess today, 5 months before the season begins or 3 months before the season begins, who's going to be in the playoffs in October. Once you have that situation, you lose that uncertainty of outcome. And at some point, advertisers are going to walk away saying, we don't want to broadcast this then because we already know how this season's going to end, give or take. We're not putting money into it. And that's the type of thing then that could easily shut down the game then until they figure out a new model where everybody feels that they have a legitimate chance to succeed.
The NFL divisional playoff round delivered plenty of drama as the field was narrowed to 4 teams heading to next weekend's conference championships. In the AFC on Saturday, the Denver Broncos edged the Buffalo Bills 33-30 in overtime, with Denver rallying late and eventually knocking off the Bills to advance.
Game. Here it is on the way, and the Denver Broncos have won it in overtime.
The Seattle Seahawks dominated the San Francisco 49ers 41-6, highlighted by a 95-yard kickoff return touchdown that set the tone for a convincing victory and punched Seattle's ticket to the NFC Championship.
It's Rashid Shaheed with the seam. Shaheed breaks through. Still going. A flag flies. Shaheed's going to take it all the way. Let's see if it stands.
Sunday action kicked off with the New England Patriots beating the Houston Texans 28-16 in Foxborough. New England's defense made some key plays, forcing multiple turnovers that helped seal the win. Patriots quarterback Drake May spoke to reporters about the win.
Just how would you describe this one?
Yeah, just proud of the guys. Battle of the elements. This is New England. This is what we try to embrace. We want to embrace it all season long. Props to our defense. Played a hell of a game. We got to protect the football better, but we made enough plays to win it.
Yeah, 4 fumbles, 2 lost by you. I know you weren't happy about that, but how were you able to put it behind you and just respond?
Yeah, it's easier when you're still winning. So that's why I kept reminding the guys we're still ahead on the scoreboard, and that's what matters. We made enough plays to come up with the win, and like I said, our defense kept on playing and helped us out a lot.
And later in the day, the Los Angeles Rams survived a tense battle with the Chicago Bears, pulling out a 20-17 overtime victory thanks to a late interception and a game-winning field goal.
Chicago from the 48, deep drop. Williams has got time. Shot downfield in trouble. Is intercepted by Cam Curl. Curl goes over, makes the play, and the Rams have it back. Good game. Mavis from 42 online, and it's good. And the Los Angeles Rams go to the championship game with an overtime win in Chicago.
It will be the Patriots at Broncos in the AFC Championship with the Rams at Seahawks in the NFC Championship, with both games determining who moves on to Super Bowl 59. I'm Teresa Skubik. Good night, Canada.